Thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce Leslie Dorman, which is getting her to read is like attending a short master class. And here we are. She's the associate director of the Writer Studio. It's the author of The Best Place to Be, a novel and stories. Her short fiction, articles, and essays have appeared in The Atlantic, Plowshares, Epiphany, 5 Points, Open City, Glimmer Train, Elle, and the New York Times, O, the Oprah Magazine, and Unholy Ghost, Writers on Depression, among other publications and anthologies. Leslie has received a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship in Fiction and is a fellow of the MacDowell Colony and Yaddo. Please welcome Leslie Dorman.
Whoa. I will never get the phrase Ashkenazi thighs out of my head. Michelle, thank you for that. I'm going to read a little bit from the first chapter of a novel I've been working on. When morning came, it was our wedding anniversary. Pink peonies in wrapping paper, a card leaning against my coffee mug. Harris gave me a version of the same card on every anniversary, every birthday. The iconic Washington Square arch with the fountain behind it, perhaps Fifth Avenue in front of it, maybe the shabby, elegant townhouses parallel to it. Scenes you tended to add a Henry James heroine to, or an adulterous Updike character, or Bob Dylan. This was the neighborhood of our marriage, although the card's scene never included the block we lived on. Harris had used a red felt tip pen to draw two hearts bumping up against each other, and an arrow pointed in the direction of the block where we did live. Every time I pulled the Washington Square arch from its envelope, I felt as if I'd swallowed a glow stick. Harris must have a whole stash of these cards hidden behind his socks. How lucky I was to have a husband inclined to initiate a marital tradition. For the longest time, I couldn't believe I deserved a marital tradition or a husband. Inside the card, Harris had used the red pen to write a very bad rhyming poem. Growing older and growing bolder together, like that. The elation I felt at seeing the arch usually won me over in spite of the bad poem sometimes lurking inside. Today's poem was so dismal, though, I felt my mouth freeze in a rictus of a smile. I used to tell myself that Harris wrote over-the-top bad poems on purpose to charmingly mock his amateurish attempt at poetry. He had always considered me the literary one because I wrote essays about Bauhaus textiles and the history of wartime fashion for little journals. I actually read a poem now and then. But over our 19 years together, I had to conclude Harris didn't have access to that variety of conscious self-consciousness. Harris might not possess that level of consciousness at all. He just wrote bad poems. I presented a gift, a small oblong pillow with the words, "In all the world, our nest is best," needle-pointed across the front. It was a Harris refrain, one I had been meaning for years to needlepoint across such a pillow. This year I had finally tried. But needlepointing for hours at a time had caused my neck to become so stiff and sore I had to give up midway and book a massage. Defeated, I took the half-finished needlepoint back to the craft store on 8th Street and sheepishly paid a young woman with braids who led a knitting group there to finish it for me. I picked it up yesterday, feeling ashamed and ineffectual as a person and a woman and a wife, unworthy of both a marital tradition and a husband. Harris didn't even say those words anymore. I hadn't remembered to buy a card. Now Harris was beaming at me as if I were the most adorable wife a husband could have. Even my bones are smiling, he said. That was kind of original. I turned my self-flagellation at hating my husband's poem into an amusing story for him about my virtuous needlepoint intentions, resulting sore neck, and urgent need for professional intervention. I left out the massage. Harris laughed and gathered me into a hug. I had married a stranger. He moved from room to room gathering his things for work, our yellow dog, Daisy, glued to his heels. Harris was the chief compliance officer in the New York office of a European bank. I wrote about fashion and curated the occasional museum show and taught fashion history at Parsons and FIT. At least I used to do such things. Lately, fewer and fewer teaching jobs came my way. Fewer editors asked me to write an essay on anything. Fewer and fewer article ideas percolated in my head to propose to those editors. I'd used myself up. The last museum show I had curated consisted of clothing worn by the Argentine grandmothers protesting their disappeared children and grandchildren year after year in Buenos Aires. That was 5 years ago. I refused to think that my diminishing career was age-related, though if any one of my friends had complained about such a turnaround in their own lives, it would have been the first thing I thought of. I felt cooked. I'd never be famous, never have a notable insight. This was it. I'd be dead soon. My friend Natalie was always asking why I didn't write a book of my own. The idea made me want to take my life now. You write it, I'd say, or why didn't I think of that? Natalie and I went to college together at Barnard. Our friendship was so long and complicated, it included at least 7 years of not being friends at all. Natalie was the first friend I told when I met Harris. How's the sex, was her first question. It's good, I said. Good, not great. Harris and I took our time finding our chemistry. I wasn't sure he had a sense of humor until the time he took me to Carnegie Hall for Arlo Guthrie Jr.'s annual Thanksgiving concert. We were in our seats, small talking before it started, when Harris bent his head toward mine and said in a low, serious voice, "You know, it's true what they say about the acoustics in this place. I can hear every word you say." It made me laugh, made me realize there might be more Harris to know. Lately, I was beginning to wonder if he simply meant exactly what he had said. Aside from divorce, nothing too terribly traumatic had ever happened to Harris. Maybe that was how he got so kind. Oh, but I loved him anyway. He was not only kind, he was tall and reasonable, and he never had a tone. Harris had a moat around him, but his moat was breachable, if only by me. Harris and husband were interchangeable words in my life. I had married the right stranger for me. I, on the other hand, was hardwired for deception. My mother's second husband had seduced me into an incest rendezvous when I was 11. Stop me if you've heard this. Because we all know how those things end. They never end. Incest was crafty. It played a long game. I was 11 when this father introduced me to sexual pleasure. I couldn't have been happier to make its acquaintance. I stalked that daddy, greedy to know better. My pleasure and the unease running beneath it was our secret. Wasn't that why we never spoke a word, never swapped a glance about it? No one knows her way around a secret like a child. Now I was skimming money from the untouchable investment account Harris had set up long ago for seeing after us when worst came to worst. Unbeknown to Harris, worst had already come to worst for me and therefore him. My credit card debt was close to $50,000 of interest-producing calamity, bloated with rare vintage clothing pieces I impulsively bid for online, and luxury skin products and skin improvement devices that came with charging cords. Also, I was thinking about having an affair. I had never been disloyal to Harris, but recently the thought had occurred to me. One day Harris would retire. When that day came, game over. I would never be able to invite a prospective lover into my home, a place where I spent most every day alone, much as I had as an unattached woman in other apartments around Manhattan. Maybe the upper middle-aged me felt sorry for the 20-something me whose young life had been devoted to panic attacks and the kind of depressions that lasted months at a time. My therapist told me I put total faith into every feeling I had, good or bad, certain I would never have a different feeling. I was a believer. As Harris readied himself for his day, I complained about my terrible night's sleep. The young woman next door to us had wailed all night, a keening interrupted by loud, angry harangues on the telephone, I assumed. I could leave a sympathetic, gently reproachful note for her with the doorman, I said. It amused Harris when I spoke in writerly sentences, which had become the sole reason I did it. The sobbing girl had starred in an iconic TV show when she was 7 or 8, but she'd grown strange-looking during puberty and had been out of work ever since. Our small pre-war building had become desirable lately to people teetering on the far edge of fame. The distinguished stage actress whose faltering career got a temporary boost from a short-lived HBO series, and the dour comedian who wrote the best-selling thriller in the last century, not to mention the junkie magician who now owned a chain of ramen restaurants. The celebrities in this building were more or less my age and Harris's age, meaning 60 and upwards. Celebrities unnerved me. I was a New Yorker. I had learned to keep my original star-struck self under wraps, but I might as well have been wearing a shameful undergarment beneath a chic transparent dress. It was appalling to feel so rattled simply by stepping into the force field of celebrity, even faded celebrity, its fizzy, hangover-inducing cocktail of expectation and disappointment still potent. Harris was immune. Just tell her you're a big fan of her misery, Harris said. Ha! I tilted up my face to receive my husband's goodbye kiss. See you tonight, beautiful girls, he told Daisy and me. When the apartment door closed, Daisy looked up at me. Boxes. She trotted after me into the bedroom, then the bathroom, watched as I drew back the shower curtain. Ta-da! Then I sliced both boxes down the middle, an overnight moisturizer in one, an LED light pulsing wand in the other. The shame chaser would kick in as soon as I stopped wondering what was taking the detox overnight mask so long. Recently, I consulted a famous astrologist to find out something about the future of my career. I had read his acerbic, bordering on mean horoscopes in one of the glossy magazines still around. Everyone is so young, I complained when I sat down. I was thinking of the talented young Sri Lankan woman at Parsons, where I was recently passed over for a plum teaching position. She was beautiful, too, with glowy skin. On the other hand, I don't really want to be young again. Maybe there was some third choice I was overlooking. The astrologer smiled. I imagined him thinking, what a perfectly Virgo-like thing to say. I waited for him to talk about my career trajectory. You don't seem like a married person, he said. Was this a compliment? An insult? Something else? You seem single, like you're still up for anything and ready to hand out your phone number. Okay, it was definitely an insult. All the people in my field are young, I said, ignoring his observation. I wondered how old he thought I was. Plus, they're from exotic, formerly third world countries. How can I compete with that? He shrugged dismissively. You're an emigre too, he said. You're an emigre from youth. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Andrea. And thank